Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. It's office hours with Dave Meltzer and, of course, the amazing Blaine Bartlett, blainebartlett.com, my mentor and extraordinary leader. Speaking of leaders, we got an expert in leadership on today to complement what we're doing here on office hours. Chuck Mollor is in the house, and he is the author of a best-selling book called The Rise of the Agile Leader. And so many different perspectives on leadership. Chuck, welcome to Office Hours.
Thanks, David. Blaine, really happy to be here.
Yeah. So agility obviously is a very important characteristic of being a leader. And as we shift the paradigm of leadership, Blaine and I wrote a book about leadership called Compassionate Capitalists, and a servant leader at the time was the latest and greatest of leadership. And yet there's still shifts going on, and it's just happening even at a quicker or more accelerated pace. Obviously, agility is one of the characteristics that help us understand change and extraordinary quick change. How have you seen this rise in an agile leader take place during these extraordinary times of quick change?
No, thank you for that. So it's interesting. I actually wrote the book right before COVID. So, fast forward to 2.5 years later, here we've gone through what we've gone through around the world. And, the book is applicable clearly to what we've been through. If anything, the book really was about the future of leadership, because the world had been changing already. Being a leader just becoming more complex, more challenging, to your point, David. And so, I think COVID just accelerated that, right? The challenges of managing multiple generations. You talked about the intensity of change. It's more intense than ever. That the pressure on innovation. We live in the Amazon world where everybody wants everything at their doorstep tomorrow. So with this sort of immediacy of services, immediacy of product and goods. And then you add the complexity of virtual hybrid workforce, the focus now on DEI, the social impact, especially in the United States around, Me Too, the cancel culture, all the other aspects of diversity and inclusion. I mean, it's just become a very, very complex, not only society, but how that's actually carried over to the workforce. So I think leadership today is as hard as we've ever seen it.
I'm interested here, Chuck, in that the rate of change, the speeding up of change, and some of the implications of that. On my podcast, The Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett, I was interviewing today a fellow by the name of Jack Wiley, Dr. Jack Wiley, and you may be familiar with Jack.
Oh, yeah.
Jack's been doing some amazing stuff for literally 40 years in the domain of employee engagement, leadership effectiveness, that sort of thing. And in our conversation today, he made a distinction between a huge study he did back in the 80s and one that he just recently completed for his newest book. And back in the 80s, he was talking about leaders, focusing more on the relationship that people have with their employer, company. So there's kind of a cultural implication to that. Leading, with the intent of developing a culture that's attractive. Fast forward 40 years from the 1980s when he did this study to today, and he's saying that has changed profoundly, that the real focus is on the relationship that an individual has with their direct boss, their direct supervisor. And it's that personal relationship that can either make or break the success of the organization from a whole number of different perspectives. In your studies and in the work that you're doing, can you kind of connect those two dots?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that shift started, to your point, not only probably in his research, but all the research I've seen over the decades. That shift has been happening for quite some time, right? For a lot of reasons. The shift to, with all the layoffs and all the transition of, that loyalty of employee to employer, that's been shifting for over 30 years. Dramatically, probably the last decade. Then you add the factor of new generations entering the workforce, seeing their parents, being dedicated and really, working their tail off and getting laid off after 30 years, or having their career run company. So we've seen the shift of really the contract labor, force that's really gone from being a pretty small percentage of the workforce. It's actually around 38% of the workforce in the U.S. right now is contract labor, independent contractors, right? Or independent consultants, or whatever you want to call yourself. They're actually estimating that in the next 2 years, that's going to be half the workforce. So when you think about, and the mindset of this new generation, they have less trust. And I think a study just came out actually this morning. They have less trust in their employers than ever before. And so there's issue around trust, there's issue around relationships. So yes, completely Blaine. I think the emphasis is on that manager to employee relationship. And frankly, when you think about the concept of employee engagement, why do people, sort of have that discretionary effort that goes beyond the minimum requirements of their job? It's because of they feeling valued and appreciated. There was a recent study that actually showed, very interesting. We have this whole surge of people transitioning out of jobs, right? Which happened for about a year, higher than we've seen in probably 20 years. And a study was done asking employers, why are people leaving, right? This huge shift in the workforce. Employers are saying, well, they're moving on because they're not happy with their pay, mental health, and the impact of virtual workforce, right? When employees are asked why they're leaving their jobs, they're saying, I'm not feeling valued, appreciated. So there's still a complete disconnect between the employee mindset and the employer mindset.
Yeah, and go ahead, David. Go ahead. Yeah.
Oh no, if you had a thought, you go ahead. That's fine.
Well, I was just going to cite two studies that I saw recently. One by the McKinsey organization and another by the Gallup organization, done in the same year. And this was, this only goes back a couple of years.
Right.
Worldwide survey said, self-survey, self-assessment. Yeah. How many of you consider yourself to be, and I'll just truncate this, but an effective leader, whoever that meant to you in your mind? About 90% of the leaders that were surveyed globally said, hey, I'm there. I'm good. Gallup surveyed the workers, said, how many of your leaders do you consider to be effective? 13%.
Right.
I mean, it was kind of, what's the disconnect?
Yeah.
And
that reminds me of checklist manifesto when they were surveying the doctors about how important it was to go through the checklist before surgery. And they all said, oh, when I'm doing surgery, it's not necessary. But what if the doctor was doing surgery on you? And 100% of the doctors said that they wanted the doctors to go through the checklist. It's an interesting aspect of human nature. Another aspect of leadership, though, and why I think your book is so valuable, is a lot of people talk in theory, philosophy when it comes to leadership, and it's, to me, arbitrary and capricious what a leader is. You actually provide a roadmap to what makes a great leader. I was hoping maybe you could take me through some of the milestones on the roadmap that people can guide themselves in a trajectory to become great leaders.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That was my intention. I wanted to kind of share a model of what an Agile Leader is and kind of walk people through that and share that very transparently. But in addition to that, I did want to provide a roadmap, a very practical roadmap of how do people get to that next level. So no matter where you are in your career, what level you are, hopefully you're going to walk away with some very practical tools and strategies that you can internalize and actually practically utilize and start working tomorrow. And there's a lot of different components to that, right? But it all starts with yourself. I mean, I think that's not a new concept. That's been around forever. But do you really understand how you show up as a leader, what leadership is for you? And frankly, part of the challenge is there is no such thing as one definition of leadership, right? Leadership itself is a very complex definition. We overlook that because, frankly, depending on what CEO shows up, your leadership culture changes instantly, right? So do you have the ability to adapt your own style and, frankly, what you think is leadership and what you've been demonstrating is leadership, depending on who the CEO is, what those expectations are? So leadership is a very complex, constantly moving and shifting concept. And frankly, not a lot of people are investing in themselves, and they don't think of leadership as a craft. Typically managing people and leading people is an afterthought or something I have to do in addition to being an expert in my profession or running a business or running a division or managing a team. And people just aren't, frankly, investing enough and the skill and the expertise and the craft of leadership. So, I mean, I think one of the challenges is really, are you investing in your own development, or are you checking in every day and every week and saying, what are the things that get me into trouble? How am I managing that? And frankly, do I understand my people? Do I understand what's important to them? One of the biggest shifts is focusing away from your own success to your people's success. And frankly, not enough people are motivated to do that these days.
I love that you went into that territory about, leadership is ill-defined, because it truly is. And there's probably as many definitions as Carter's got little liver pills out there. Just a little here. But at the end of the day, I mean, I work in this field. At the end of the day, if you strip all of the attributes of leader in people's minds, what you got is somebody that's causing movement. That's what any leader does, is they cause movement. And by that definition, I mean, everybody's a mover, because we're always causing movement regardless of the system we're in. So the real net of it is, am I causing the kind of movement I need to get the result I want? And am I doing that with elegance? I don't have to go back and clean up after myself. The idea of Agile Leader and Agile leadership, I think, addresses that. And I'd like you to just kind of comment on that, if you would. But the ability to be agile, to be able to quickly shift in service of elegant movement, so that I can get the results that I say that we would like to have.
Yeah, I agree with that. So it's interesting, because the first thing I think about is the world of chaos, right? And I use this visual, this image of a surfer on a surfboard, right? Because the ocean is unstable, it's ever changing. But on a surfboard, you gotta find stability in order to be able to navigate through the oceans. Leadership has got to create that environment for their people. We live in a world of chaos, of constant, intense change. We never know where we have to shift and where we have to be agile. So part of it is not just being able to manage that effectively for yourself and for your people, but how do you create an environment of stability so people can actually focus and be their optimal selves? So often it is about creating that environment. You've heard a lot about emotional intelligence, obviously, and psychological safety. Psychological safety is really this whole notion of creating an environment of safety where people can challenge the status quo, can fail and make mistake without having a punitive response. But it's creating stability so people can flourish and people can be their optimal selves. And sometimes we lose sight of that because of the intensity of change and the constant shift of direction, whether it's business strategy, what my office space looks like, what kind of team I'm part of, what my goals and objectives are. 'Cause that's part of the change or the challenge, is that, what our strategies at the beginning of the year could be, completely a different direction, 3 months into the year. So this whole notion of chaos is real, because companies are constantly have to adapt to the market and their customers and the changes. So this whole notion, even strategic planning, doesn't even exist anymore, right? Your strategic plan is got to be ripped up 6 months into every year. So that's notion of stability during times of change and chaos is a really, really critical concept.
Beautiful.
And pragmatic look at that is so essential, which is why anyone that has aspirations of being an intelligent follower, I mean, a leader, should pick up the book, The Rise of the Agile Leader. Let's make sure we all make the shift, keep up with the times and all the changes of our time. Chuck Mollor, please come back and visit us soon. Thank you so much for your insight.
Appreciate David, Blaine. Thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate the time here.
You bet.
Yep. We'll see you soon. There's so many different ways to get people engaged. And I know we didn't really talk about the engagement side of leadership, right, but that's, to me, mathematical advantage of being a leader in business is the more we can get people engaged, the greater the productivity, the greater the possibility and the probability, but also the profitability as well. And you are an expert in that space of leading people. And I can't wait to get your feedback on that book as well, in the utilization of that roadmap for helping other people. Anyway, Dan's waiting here patiently. There he is.
Hey, how are you?
Perfect timing, Dan.
Yeah, that's my alarm to make sure I was here, It's good to be back.
Yeah, it's good to have you back. And look, you're a co-founder of Unbound Merino, and It's merino, right? Not merino.
Merino.
Yeah, we got that right. Anyway, there's so much going on in the apparel business because of technology of the apparel, and there's energy put into apparel today. There's things that don't need to be washed, the things that are odor free, and you've really kind of cracked the code on utilization of the new technologies that exist in apparel, and specifically wool products, which historically had some challenges. What were some of the challenges of wool products, and what have you been able to accomplish with the merino products that you have?
Well, you know, we didn't invent anything that's proprietary or innovate that much. Merino wool is completely naturally antibacterial and odor resistant and has this functional purpose, which is so amazing. But when I was looking for merino wool clothing to help me with my basically pack light for my travels, I was kind of astonished that the stuff that existed was all just made for outdoors. So if you're going on a canoe trip or you're going hiking or you're doing a triathlon, there's a million things that I was finding merino wool for, base layers and things like that. But none of it looked nice if I couldn't dress it up and go to a cocktail bar or anything. So I was looking everywhere for it. And then just like, why doesn't this exist? So we didn't innovate in the fabric itself, but we innovated in the positioning. We made it for a different audience. I'm like, I want to have clothing I can travel with, go on that hike, but also go out for a cocktail and feel like I'm not out of place. And I couldn't find it. So I'm like, I'm going to scratch my own itch and make it. That was it. That was the origin of our product.
From a design standpoint, I mean, you talked about positioning. So, I've done some consulting in the specialty retail space with designers and clothing and that sort of stuff. The design aspect of it actually is crucial, regardless of whether you want to enter a space or not. If the design doesn't catch hold, you got a lot of inventory that you have to eat. What did you pay attention to from a design standpoint that kind of satisfied not only the itch that you had, but allowed you to actually move into the space as well as you have?
Well, the thing is I'm not a fashion guy, and I wasn't in the apparel business before. All I wanted was stuff that fit nice and looked nice. And we just had to work to get to the point where we had those nice fits. We're not making something that's like trying to assume what the trend is going to be or set the trend. What we're doing is just making the timeless classic. So a black t-shirt that you can dress up or dress down. So we sort of have stepped around having to like focus on the design trends or have something that's trendy. Our stuff, it's like if you saw a picture of yourself wearing it 5-10 years ago, it's going to look great. It looks great today, and it'll probably look great in 5 or 10 years. So we're sort of doing things a little differently and circumventing that need for having to be design forward and design centric. We're all about the fabrics, the materials, the quality, and the fits. And we don't focus on the trend of design, if that's what you're asking.
Beautiful. Great answer.
And, I wear Unbound t-shirts, especially because I travel so much. And those who travel know what it's like to, number one, be uncomfortable, 2, understand the temperature changes, and then 3, have to get off an airplane for a meeting and, look like a raisin or a raisinette with all the different wrinkles from, either falling asleep or just sitting in the same position for 3 to 5 hours, dependently. Coming from someone that had no situational knowledge, experience, or expertise in the space or in the science of wool, how difficult was it to be able to manufacture, such what I consider a competitive and outstanding product when you have, no background at all that said, hey, I can scratch this itch, but to be honest, it's, it sounds like a lot of kids to me that say, hey, I want to be a sports agent. And I'm all, well, what qualifications do you have to be a sports agent? And like, well, I like sports. It's like, okay, it's scratching that itch. How were you able to close that chasm of experience and expertise in order to facilitate building a business around something you didn't know anything about?
Well, it's interesting. Once the business started taking off and I talked to people that were from the clothing business and they learned how little I knew, how little of a background I had in clothing, they're like, what gave you the nerve to get into the clothing business in the first place? And the true answer is, I guess I just didn't know any better. I didn't know how things were done, and that worked out. That worked out well. What I did know was that I wanted this product to exist and what I wanted it to be like, and that it didn't exist. So I just went to manufacturers and in a very backwards way, just sort of reverse engineered and Frankensteined a t-shirt prototype and kept iterating until it was the right fit. And I just knew when it fit right. I'm like, this is the material felt right. I'm like, this is the product I want to sell. Let's take it to market and see if other people have the same use like I do. I knew I needed this product to exist. I'm like, are there other people like me? And that was the whole premise. So we did a crowdfunding campaign and we tried to sell $30,000 in that campaign for the first month. And we ended up selling 400,000. And that was the sign. I'm like, there are more people like me that want this product. And on the back of that, figuring it out, it was just hard work. It's just like a year and a half of like, I had another business at the time. My business partners were super busy with, new kids and jobs. So we would just meet up every Friday night. We'd give each other homework and just worked really, really hard for a year and a half to just reverse engineer the brand we wanted to exist in. And we did it through just hard work and I guess being naive.
Well, the naivete, I think, is one thing, but I also want to applaud the use of crowdfunding, that whole idea, as much for obviously raising the capital that you were looking for, but I think more importantly, and this is actually where I think that the demarcation point came in, it was proof of concept. If you can say, okay, we want to do 30 and you do 400,000, that's, to your point, tells you that there's a market out there, and we've kind of landed on a sweet spot. So now what do we do with it? Now, how do we actually begin to penetrate? So for those of you that are listening, and this is less of a question and more of just an observation, crowdfunding has got a couple of different reasons for it. One is, you raise the capital, but the other one is you get proof of concept. Does this thing actually hold water? So,
and that's the hardest piece. It's like, once you have product market fit, you can start to employ all the other tactics, all the performance marketing stuff. It's like, that you have the ability to sell this product, everything else comes into play. But if you don't have product market fit and the crowdfunding flops, it's like you can just dust the dirt off your shoulders and walk away, and you didn't blow a ton of money. You let the proof of concept exist just within that one campaign. And that was it. That was it for us. So scratching the itch. I'm like, I think this could work. I truly, in my heart of hearts, believe this could work. And if the crowdfunding didn't work, I'd be like, that's fine. I liked this idea. The market clearly doesn't want this idea to exist. At the very worst, I have a box full of the t-shirts I wanted to exist anyway. So it was win-win.
Win-win-win. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, it just shows you the value of crowdfunding and, the aspect of being able not only to get a market analysis, but a market adoption, and also get funded along the way as well. For you, though, while you were developing the business, what were you doing and how did you make your decision to go ahead and make this, what I assume to be a side hustle, your primary business?
Well, once I had that feedback that this thing worked, I walked away from my other business. I had a video production agency. I said to my business partner, and like, I got to pursue this. I went down to paying myself, I think, I wasn't even enough to pay rent. So, I was scraping by. I wasn't going out to eat, but I just had the conviction. I'm like, if we could do this in the first month, I knew I didn't have a business yet. I had a start. I had a reason to believe that we had product market fit. The next thing is like build an e-commerce store and turn that into a real business engine. And I just felt like it's now or never. Go all in, make this happen. And I guess it was just a ton of conviction and belief in myself.
But it is nice to just interrupt Blaine real quick, right? The point of entry today compared to previous types of opportunities of what we would have to invest in ourselves in order to effectuate market fit, retail, brick and mortar locations, marketing expense, where today someone can scratch that itch and mitigate risk immensely and provide yourself different milestones as an entrepreneur that were never in existence before. So I think, it's such a great testament to being an entrepreneur and how you did it to so many others. But the negative side would be, because it has a low point of entry, we now have a very crowded or noisy marketplace of people that are able to effectuate ideas that may not even have market fit, but confuse the market in the education process of what merino wool does or other pieces of apparel that, in the past, the competition was far less. But go ahead, Blaine. I just wanted to point that out because it's encouraging to me as an entrepreneur, but also want to raise awareness of, some of the challenges because of the low point of entry.
Yeah, I was struck, Dan, just in that little narrative about how, and I'm going to use the word from something that our previous guest, how agile you were. And if I put it in the context of leading the company, leading the emergence of the company, you were able to pivot pretty quickly, and not just once, but there were a couple of pivots that were made there. If you contrast what I would assume would be a traditional leadership model that you may have carried in your mind about how am I supposed to be doing this with what you actually ended up doing, what would be that delta? What's the gap there between what you thought it should have been and what you actually found it needed to be?
In terms of my leadership style?
Yeah. Yep.
So, it started out where we were doing everything and they're just bursting at the seams. Figuring out how this e-commerce business worked. You have to do customer service, you have to do fulfillment, you have to continue to develop new products, have your packaging. It's all, you wear all the hats. The first thing, all we did is just do it all and slowly replace ourselves. And I think my leadership style is quite different from a lot of people. I do talk to a lot of people as I'm trying to figure out, what does it mean to even be a CEO? When there's a transition from being a founder when it's just me and my two business partners to, the company starts to grow. And now I'm a CEO, a small CEO, so we're still a small company, but I've been on that sort of journey of figuring out what leadership is. And for me, it's like, do the stuff first. Find people that can do what you're doing, but have the smarts to have the autonomy. The first hire we had was someone in our warehouse to do our fulfillment because we were doing it at first. And just giving him the trust. It's like, we trust you. We don't have to be there with you, watching over, making sure you're doing it fast. And he figured out how to sort of build the systems himself. And we go back in and re-engage and learn how the systems are and try to help build them with him. But over time, we just replaced ourselves, and everyone in our company has an immense amount of autonomy, especially given the fact that, we all travel a lot. We're a fully remote company aside from our warehouse. For me, it's just like, let everyone shine, let everyone be their own star, and just don't breathe over their necks. In fact, at our warehouse, some feedback, we did an employee survey and we said, what would you like to see different? And they said, we wish you guys came around more. We'd love to see you more, just to hang out. And I felt like, that's nice. It's not like they don't want their boss around breathing down their neck. It's like they want us around. We have a very, very good culture, even given the fact that we're all apart. So
good.
Well, I think it'd be a great case study in entrepreneurship and startup because you had so many different milestones that face so many different people, and you have determined what your own leadership agility is through being an intelligent follower and what I call a test and go approach. Dan, congratulations, especially since the last time I saw you. I love the product. I'm wearing one underneath my hoodie right now for my trip to New Orleans. Not only will I look good when I get off, but I'll look great in the French Quarter with a bunch of 12-year-olds partying with me.
And you'll smell good too.
I'll always smell good, that's for sure. Thank you, Dan, for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me back, guys.
It's so good to have you back.
Take care, Dan.
All right, we're rocking and rolling. Our next guest, I'm super excited to talk to. He's the CEO of Revenued, and Solomon Lax is here. Solomon, welcome to Office Hours.
Thank you for having me. What time is it in your neck of the woods? Where are you, LA?
Orange County in Seattle, 3:30 or so, Pacific time. But Solomon, there's this nuance in investment and financing that has always driven me crazy. And what's driven me crazy is there's a lot of people that have gone all in. They haven't had to mitigate risk like our previous guest, but they've lived in their car, they've ruined their credit, they sold their house, and these are the people that I love to invest in. And yet, when I'm trying to get credit lines for them, and I'm trying to get financing or even sometimes investment, these are the people that are being looked down upon. The ones that are all in, and it drives me nuts. And it seems like you've been able to create a system that allows us to really value what a winning jockey looks like. And we don't necessarily have to have a one-fit-all approach to how to be successful in business.
Well, I appreciate that intro, but it's a little more nuanced, which is that it's true that many founders just absolutely wreck their personal credit as they're building their business. And in the eyes of a typical bank, the tool that they have to underwrite somebody is FICO, right? So if you wreck your personal credit, that's sort of how you get tagged for almost the rest of your business life, your business career, until you heal that. What we've done is create a different, viewpoint or prism into credit, which I think is going to get, outside of our company is also going to get additional traction eventually in banks, which is to look at things like cash flows in a business. So leaving aside all the fancy acronyms and buzzwords about machine learning and everything, it's a very different way of looking at somebody's business, right? But we don't get to the level that you do, which is you're testing the jockey. You're saying, hey, this person is a great jockey. I'm going to bet on them. I'm going to put a lot of money and capital behind them. We have to make too many decisions to be able to do that. Like we can't possibly know what the jockey's like.
Yeah.
But you do have a pretty good mechanism by which you can assess the financial viability of the company. Regardless.
Yeah. So this is not just us. I mean, this is sort of where things are moving, right? You have a lot of hype about AI and everything else, but the truth is that if you have a lot of data points about a business, right, you can, and if you also have it in real time, meaning you have access to their bank account, you have access to something else about them that gives you a lot of data points, you can start making really good decisions about credit that have nothing to do with their FICO score, that have nothing to do with their personal credit. And this, I think, is the wave of the future. I mean, we're there first because we have the first credit card and line of credit for business owners with, personal subprime credit. And, we're getting traction, getting listed on all these sites as the alternative in case you have a sub 660 FICO score. But I think it's inevitable that it just gets adopted in a very wide way, a very, very broad adoption.
And in that broad adoption, cash flow, especially in a downturning economy, is such a significant indicator of success. And even to the point where smaller local banks are funding real estate deals off of cash flow, where they never have done that before, with the short-term rental business growing, et cetera.
Yeah.
What are some of the key components and how has, for example, e-commerce and short-term rentals changed the banking philosophy behind cash flow analysis and revenue analysis to create security in creating lines of credit or expansion or capitalization of businesses?
Yeah, so that's a great point. The e-commerce world is one I'm more familiar with, and in that case, you have a half a dozen larger tech companies that their touch point with the merchant or the small business is that they're already doing something for them, they're processing for them or similar, right? So Amazon has a product, Square has a product, PayPal has a product. Anybody who is in the transactional, Shopify has a product. Anybody who's in the transactional flow of e-commerce who has a lot of data about that merchant, about that seller, right? And also sort of has the keys to the kingdom, because if you're on that platform, it's going to be a lot of pain moving away from the platform. They're starting to lock in. They feel very comfortable extending capital against what they see as being the stream of cash flow through the business. that's one sort of perspective on cash flow. And those guys, because they're techies, they're very comfortable with this type of decision making. I mean, they do that all day, every day with the rest of their business. Banks are not there yet. And I've had these conversations, off the record with banks, and I go like, guys, like, these are our customers. When we try to get into their data, we have to sort of back into it using a third-party plat or similar. All right. If you're inside the wall already, you have 200,000 small business customers. Why are you just turning down everybody with below 660, right? Why don't you start looking at businesses from a cash flow perspective? And I never get a great answer. Like I always have people say like, yeah, we really should be doing it. We will be looking to do it. And again, a large bank has more techies, who will code this, more data scientists than I possibly could put on my payroll. Like I think my guys are brilliant, right? But still, like if you're a top 20 bank, you can go ahead and do that. There's a failure of being able to turn a very large ship. And by the way, I'm sorry to rant about this, but we pivoted during PPP, during COVID, because we had to stop originating really the traditional products, and we ended up partnering with a small bank, Cross River Bank. Cross River Bank ended up doing like it was in one of the top 3 or 5 banks that distributed money during PPP. And it was a crazy ride. And the reason big banks didn't do it is just they lacked institutional will to go ahead and pursue it and do it. So there's a lot of hurdles to get over, but they're not technical hurdles.
Yeah, mindset. That's yeah. Now, I mean, the visible rubric here would be cash flow. What are some of the other things that you would be looking at? Cash flow being one element, but what are some of the other key criteria that you actually would pay attention to that a traditional bank may not? That would say yes.
You know what? I think most of the rest a traditional bank would pay attention to. They just might not have it readily at their fingertips. They might just be like too much of a paper process. But I think every bank would look at background. Everybody would look at, if they do a LexisNexis poll and see that somebody had a felony fraud conviction, for embezzlement, that they would hesitate before giving them money, right? Yeah. So, stuff like that. Everybody's going to do character and gauge that. Everybody's going to look at outstanding judgments against the company, right? Everybody's going to do a lot of these things. Some of the more esoteric stuff we don't find moves the needle much, right? So there is, Cabbage, for example, is purchased by Amex. They used to always talk about models that you could build just based on UPS deliveries and stuff like that. We haven't found that to be particularly meaningful or powerful. We'll run 100 different models, but there's no huge esoteric like, we see in social media that people think you're whatever. So that predicts how you're going to do on a loan. Yeah. It's not really that. But eliminating paper is a big deal, by the way. I mean, KYB will take a business. I mean, KYB is the biggest pain point. KYB will take a business bank, to try to set up an account for a small business. It can take you 2 weeks to get your account open.
Yeah.
And lastly, can you hear me, Blaine? Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yes. So lastly, during the last downturn economy, subprime lending got crushed. And we're utilizing subprime lending here. Is there any risk in a cash flow type of scenario that we faced during the housing crisis with subprime lending, or is it going to survive if the market destroys itself?
No. We're seeing it already. So in the more traditional, like term loan type stuff, we have seen the spike in defaults of considerably, considerable spike in defaults. But that came pre the recession. A lot of small businesses really got hammered by inflation, right? They just didn't. They had margin compression. They did not keep up with their rise in costs. They did not pass that on to the customer. I think they probably felt that they lacked pricing power. You know, they're not a big company, and we actually saw a large spike in defaults in the revenue product, which is a dynamic, newly like fresh underwriting every single day, basically, because the machine is looking at what's going on in your cash flow on a daily basis. It has a much better performance because it's real time, right? The difference between FICO and similar is the bank doesn't know that your credit's really gone downhill until you stop paying something, right? Default is the first news they get that you're in trouble. In our case, we see the cash flow diminishing and going downhill, and we'll say, okay, we have to lower the line. The line capacity is not going to be kept at $30,000. We have to push it down to 15. The other thing is we find that the merchants and the small businesses really like the product, so it's like one of the last things they're going to stop paying. It's sort of a lifeline, but I would tell you that it's gotten pretty bad for a lot of small businesses. Subprime small businesses is under a lot of pressure.
Yeah,
I would think so. Well, thank you for giving help to those small business owners. Thank you for creating flexible lines of credit based off of revenue and cash flow. It gives opportunities and more options for those businesses, not only to survive, but to thrive, as you've seen over the last few years. Everyone, that's all. Thanks, Solomon Lax, for joining us, CEO of Revenued. If you are a small business, check them out. It's a great mechanism, a great methodology in order to effectuate greater inventory and greater sales. Thanks for joining us, Solomon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. All right.
That was good. That was good. I love the scalability of that, and that kind of answers the question that Esther has put in the chat here. There is scalability kind of coupled with their whole business models. So Esther, check them out for sure.
Well, and the difference in that e-commerce side of things with a flex line is that they can see the diminished cash flow. And they're, like he said, it's the last thing that they want to default on because it's their lifeline. When we're looking at subprime lending in the real estate space, you were looking at second, third, and fourth homes. You were looking at people that could take safe harbor because of the laws in their home. So they actually were motivated not to pay their mortgages because there was so much benefit in just staying there without paying and so many negotiations. So it really is an interesting nuance to subprime lending. But we have our friend Bob Larson here, Dr. Bob Larson.
Bob's in the house.
He's the director of the Center of Occupational Psychiatry. He's a speaker and author as well. And I love the title of his book because I see it within the context of so many people that I'm mentoring, coaching, and advising in businesses, the concept of wounded workers. And it's the tales from a working man's shrink. Welcome, Dr. Larson, to Office Hours.
Well, thanks for having me, Blaine and David. Glad to be here. I'm coming to you from my home office. It's a global world in Santa Fe, Nuevo Mexico.
Beautiful.
Love the Bolo.
Yeah, Go Lobos, right. The land of enchantment. My wife was a lifelong Californian. We came to see the balloon fiesta. She said, I could live here. I said, really? She said, you want to move? I said, when? And so we left our home on the San Francisco Bay. I still have my office in Oakland, but here we are, better known, should be, as the land of entrapment.
I love it. Well, I know when we
that was quite a setup.
when we cruised through there, my wife said the same thing. I could live here, and but I'm still here in California, and we enjoy the quality of life of visiting Santa Fe, New Mexico, of course. But
we have a guest room. We have two.
Oh, there we go. Be careful what you ask for. The Meltzers are coming. Anyway, occupational psychiatry is interesting because we were talking about engagement. And I think closely tied to the biggest threat to our employment issues is why can't we get people engaged? And there's a variety of different philosophies but there is a psychiatry or a psychiatric side to why people aren't engaged. So I wanted to explore this idea of being wounded as a worker and what the psychiatry behind that wounded feeling, because obviously, we see it in sports. A wounded athlete, unless you're Patrick Mahomes, is diminished in their engagement and productivity. Most wounded workers or athletes, are not productive to the same degree. So what is the psychiatry behind being a wounded worker, being less engaged and less productive?
Excellent question. Well, so for some people, it's pretty obvious. I deal with a lot of first responders that are involved in critical incidents. And in our world, unfortunately, that involves police-involved shootings and mass shootings. And then firefighters, they have long careers, and if they go long enough, they have to watch people burn to death in a car and not be able to help them. Or they have to go into an active shooting scene like in Richmond, California, where they have to put Kevlar vests on because they could be a victim, okay? But their duty is to go in. Just like the first responders after 9/11. I visited those houses after 9/11, and the country was behind them. One house I saw, they lost 8 workers. So they need the support of the community. So those are real wounds. Women raped with guns in convenience stores, people who get their hands cut off in machinery, that kind of thing. And I become their advocate. I don't like insurance companies. I hope nobody's really offended by that. It's a good day when we take money from an insurance company. I own no insurance stocks, and I give it to somebody who's had their arm cut off and give them a future. Not with the money, give them a limb, give them, a good vocational rehabilitation expert to get involved. And, we can have one-armed pharmacists, things of that sort. But along with what you're saying, optimal performance, I work with the Giants. Now I'm sporting Dodger blue today, but along with my bolo tie. But I'm also wearing my Giants 2014 World Series ring because I've worked with the Giants going back to the previous ownership group with Bob Lurie. We put on a conference at spring training called Optimal Performance in Professional Athletes. So you could relate to that. And it's got to do with physical training, but also having a team effort and building a team and getting the right people on the team. So while I see people who have workers' comp claims, other kind of injury claims, I do fitness for duty evaluations. Like, should we hire this person? Or can this surgeon go back to being a surgeon? My master's degree was on impaired physicians, and I don't think I really understood and appreciated. You see this in athletes too. Impaired, you think, oh, they drink a little bit much. How about a surgeon that's got doing intrarectal cocaine during surgery? Or an anesthesiologist who steals a bag of fentanyl from the hospital, but doesn't think he's an addict because he uses sterile technique when he puts it in his vein. So denial is pretty important there. And we help them to, hopefully, those are human resources. Can the person be salvaged? Can they get on board? A number of my colleagues, they don't completely buy into where I'm coming from here. I'm a working class kid. I speak the language of the street. And the people that come in to see me, they're freaked out. They're going to go see a psychiatrist, and they come down from Redding, California, or from Rodeo, California, and they're seeing a shrink, and it feels like somebody must think I'm like loco or crazy or whatever. And one of the things I've developed is what I call working with executives, associates at big firms, slapping therapy. Now, and what it is confronting people on their bad behavior. And so a guy comes in, he's referred by the VP at Human Resources for a big firm downtown. And I'll say to him, so why do you think you're here? He says, I don't know. I said, come on, you're a smart guy. Give it a guess. Well, it's probably got something to do with people. There you go. Bingo. What people? I don't know. I said, let's start with secretaries. And he'll say, okay, what about them? I said, how many have you had in the last year? A couple. I said, how about 5? Nobody wants to work with you. And here's the deal. You're technically very good as an international tax expert, But if you can't get along with the secretaries, you're gone. And so what I help them to do is realize that they have to learn to be decent. And I mean, like I said to the guy, so, okay, we'll meet again next week. I don't really like you too much. I can see why others don't. So you have a homework assignment. So tell me 2 ways you welcome your new secretary. By the way, what's her name? He says, I don't know. I said, well, how long have you worked with her? 2 weeks. Okay, what's her first name? I don't know. Her second name, her last name. I said, wow, you do have a problem. So your homework assignment is tell me 2 ways you welcome your new secretary. And he says, well, how do I do that? I said, that's why they call it homework. Yeah. And he comes in the next week, he's smiling. He said, her name is Sally. And I said, okay, that's good. How'd you welcome her? He said, I said, good morning, how are you? I said, whoa, that was a big one, wasn't it? And then I said, what else? He said, well, we got a bunch of work done. I went out at lunch, got her a bouquet of flowers, and I came back from my lunch break and said to her, these are for you. And she seemed surprised. I said, well, with your reputation. And I said, well, how'd it go? And long and short of it, they got a lot done. He went home, he took a run, and he felt great. And I said, man, it ain't rocket science. Yeah. You either get this or you're gone. So, he got it.
What you're talking about, Bob, I love this. Dave and I wrote a book over my right shoulder here called Compassionate Capitalism. And when I first started that book and started outlining it, the impetus had to do with the toxicity of 40 years worth of work that I had done as a consultant and been associated with large organizations around the planet. And the toxicity in these systems was just prevalent everywhere. Not maliciously so, but it seemed to be embedded in the nature of the process of discardability, cogs in a wheel. Recognition, to your point, was cursory at best. I mean, all of those things. So the idea of the wounded worker, you talk about physical damage. How does some of your work address, and the example of the boss that you were just talking about is illustrative of that. But how are some of the other ways that what are some of the other ways that you would actually approach a business culture that's toxic? How would you begin to shift that ship of state?
Yeah. Well, I moved my office consciously to the financial district, and there were no psychiatrists down there at the time I did that. I wanted to be where people worked. I was in an office with a bunch of guys that were psychoanalysts. I thought I was going to pull my hair out. I mean, it's like, they saw everybody 3 times a week. And it was like, oh my God, if I don't get around some real people. So, it was so refreshing to be down there, the energy that's in a business center area. And you get to know the corporate culture. And all companies have different cultures. My mom got me a job when I was a teenager and I was starting college. And I worked for W.R. Grace Construction Materials. And I was on the loading dock. And the culture there was the most dangerous day of the week to work was payday, because the guys would go out and they'd get they'd get Italian beef, Italian sausage sandwiches. I'm half Italian. And that was fine. And then they'd buy a couple quarts of beer and a quart of Jack Daniels. And when you went back to work on Friday afternoon, you knew that the forklift driver was hammered. Okay. And it was the most dangerous day to work. And then Monday, the loan sharks would show up. And I'd see these guys handing money and say, so you just got paid Friday and you're getting money? He said, yeah. He said, it's not bad. It's a point a week. I said, like 1%? He said, yeah. I said, like 52% a year. He said, yeah. Okay. This is how they lived. And then on Thursday before payday, I thought they called this guy the butcher. And he came in and he would ask people, whether they wanted light meat or dark meat. And he was a pimp. Okay. So this was the corporate culture I dealt with there. And I worked around felons, which ex-felons. I didn't really realize how valuable that would be, because I learned that you didn't say the wrong thing to those guys. Okay. Because they really would hurt you. So that's a certain kind of working class corporate culture. And we would also have a big banner up there, and it would announce 182 days since the last lost time injury. We were working 2 and 3 shifts a day, hundreds of guys with punch presses, forklifts, 55-gallon drums, and trucks and trains. And I'm thinking, how does a guy go 6 months and nobody has to take a day off work because they got hurt? And this young Nigerian guy who was a student at University of Chicago, they sent him to the local occupational medicine group. He comes back, his arm's in a sling, and they assign him to load a truck with me. He's never done that work before. He worked in the factory, and I couldn't keep up with him. That's how afraid he was. It took me 2 summers, and I saw somebody who had to take off work because he got crushed between 2 trucks. So that's all part of the corporate culture. It's a little different at Wells Fargo, okay? It's a little bit different at these high-tech companies. I saw what happened with the corporate culture when we moved, right before we moved out of San Francisco. The buildings across the street were still there. They had been the housing authority for the city and county, the furniture mart, and an insurance company. And then they became Dolby, Uber, and Twitter. Okay. And if you don't think that changed the neighborhood, okay, everybody was walking around like this.
Yep.
So you gotta learn the culture that you're in, that you're consulting with, right? And you go in and you have to confront them at times with some things that aren't working.
Yeah, I like the flat philosophy of the truth vibrates the fastest. Bob Larson, Dr. Bob Larson, thank you so much for helping us with those wounded workers and allowing us to understand with very entertaining stories the lessons of how we can be more engaged and productive, to learn to love what you do, which is my favorite lesson of the Super Bowl, that when we love what we do, it will tell us all its secrets. And thank you for helping people love what they do. We'll have you back on, Bob. I got to hear more of your stories and more of your lessons. Yeah. Incredible. Thank you for joining us on August Hours.
I know you guys love what you do. You can see it in your countenance. So
thank you. I'll come visit you. Stay in my room. I'll be there. Thank you.
Mine too, by the way. The land of entrapment.
Well, as we say in the Jemez Pueblo, where they speak Toa, we say, instead of Onaha, which is goodbye, I'll just say later, which is Denaha.
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 All righty.
Ciao.
Thanks, Bob.
Ciao. Thank you, Bob. Awesome. All right, Blaine, what's the takeaway for the day? We've had 4 extraordinary people helping us learn a lot. Engagement.
And I know we're short on time here, so I won't elaborate much on it. But if you're not engaged in what you're doing, why do it? I mean, I'll just kind of drop that little piece there and just let it set.
I like it a lot. And, for me, it's interested. It's amazing the differential that's created when these people are just more interested and they take action on that interest. There's so many different multitudes of ways to mitigate risk by being more interested today. But I think too many people are just sitting back and receiving information instead of seeking what they want to learn or what they want to love and where the light exists in that. So be more interested than interesting. One of my favorite sayings is actually my takeaway for the day. BlaineBartlett.com, one of the greatest mentors in the working world, and he will put you at ease like he has me. Please. I'll see you in Santa Fe, New Mexico, Blaine. I got the room right next to you.
Okay, buddy. Enjoy Mardi Gras. I see Miles in the background. Rub his head for me.
I will. Thank you, my friend.
Okay.
All right, everyone. We are pre-Mardi Gras trip. Who brings 2 12-year-olds to Mardi Gras? That's right, Julie and I do. Talking about daring. That's what we're going to do. There's going to be a lot of good food, good fun, and hopefully some great exercise and good weather. But for everyone else, enjoy the holiday weekend. Enjoy yourself. Be more interested than interesting. Be kind to your future self. Email me if you need anything. Training tomorrow still will be 7 a.m. Pacific time, even though I'll be down in New Orleans. 7 a.m. Pacific time. Over 80,000 people are registered for tomorrow. We are so blessed. If you're not registered, email me, david@dmeltzer.com. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you.